My parents held me down, screaming, "It's for your own good," while my brother tried to inject me with HGH, then chased me into the driveway yelling, "Better dead than short." When I begged them to stop, they cheered him on. I didn't say a word. That was 8 years ago. This morning, he was standing outside my restaurant in tears. Growing up, my parents' obsession with status consumed our entire household. Every morning, my father would line me and my twin brother up against the kitchen wall, measuring our heights with a ruler he kept specifically for this ritual. For every quarter inch we fell short of his ideal growth chart, we'd lose privileges. No TV, no dessert, no friends over. By age 12, my brother Pablo had discovered human growth hormone forums online and started sneaking supplements he bought with birthday money. The madness escalated when we hit high school. Dad installed pull-up bars in every doorway and mandated we hang from them for 20 minutes before meals to stretch our spines. Mom would blend these disgusting protein shakes with raw eggs and force us to drink them while she timed us. The faster we finished, the more love points we earned for the week. I remember gagging down those vile concoctions while Pablo had trained himself to chug them without even tasting. But Pablo took it further, so much further. He'd sleep on the floor because he read that soft mattresses compressed your spine. He wore ankle weights to school hidden under baggy jeans. He even convinced our parents to let him get limb-lengthening surgery consultations when he turned 16. They drove him to 3 different clinics, proudly showing off his dedication to excellence. The breaking point came during my junior year. I'd secretly joined the wrestling team, a sport where being shorter gave me advantages in my weight class. When my parents found out, they locked me out of the house for an entire weekend. Pablo watched from his bedroom window as I slept in the backyard shed, and when I knocked on his window begging him to sneak me food, he just shook his head and mouthed, "You chose this." College became my escape. I moved across the country to Oregon, embraced rock climbing where my compact build was an asset, and met my girlfriend Samantha, who stood 2 inches taller than me and couldn't care less. For the first time, I felt human instead of a failed experiment. When Easter rolled around 3 years later, Sam convinced me to visit home. "Maybe they've changed," she said optimistically. I should have known better when my mother's first words at the door were, "Did you shrink?" before even saying hello. Pablo appeared behind her, and I barely recognized him. His face was gaunt, his posture unnaturally rigid from wearing a back brace 18 hours a day. He'd grown maybe an inch since high school, but looked like he'd aged a decade. The growth hormones had wreaked havoc. His jaw had enlarged grotesquely, his forehead protruded, and his hands looked swollen. "Brother!" he exclaimed, immediately standing back to back with me to compare heights. "I'm getting the surgery next month. Doctor says I could gain 3 inches if we do both tibius and femurs." I felt sick. "Pablo, you could be paralyzed. You could die. Better dead than short," he said, completely serious. Our parents nodded approvingly. Dinner turned into an intervention, except I was the one being intervened on. They'd printed out articles about height maximization techniques, circled classified ads for tall men only job postings, and even had a PowerPoint presentation about how I was sabotaging my genetic potential. When I mentioned Sam, my mother's face twisted. "She's using you for a green card, obviously. No woman wants a man she can look down on." "She's from Seattle," I said flatly. "Even worse, she's settling because she has no other options," my father added. The final straw came when Pablo pulled out a syringe at the dinner table. "Just try it once," he urged, waving the HGH in my face. I got extra from my doctor. When I refused, he lunged at me, trying to inject me by force. Our parents cheered him on, my mother actually holding my arms while my father shouted, "It's for your own good." I broke free and ran, Pablo chasing me with the needle, his chemically destroyed body barely able to keep up. I made it to my rental car and peeled out, watching in the rearview mirror as my entire family stood in the driveway, my brother still waving the syringe like a madman. The next morning, I woke up to 47 missed calls and a string of voicemails that progressed from disappointment to disownment to Pablo sobbing that I was choosing to be genetic waste. 2 months later, I got a call from a hospital in Mexico. Pablo's surgery had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong. The nurse spoke broken English, but I understood enough. Infection, complications, come immediately. Her voice was professionally calm, but I could hear the underlying urgency. I booked the first flight out, my hands shaking the entire time. Sam wanted to come, but I told her no. This was my family's mess, my brother bleeding out for a few inches of bone. The hospital was exactly what you'd expect from a cut-rate medical tourism facility. Peeling paint, flickering lights, and that smell of disinfectant trying to mask something worse. The taxi driver had tried to warn me, speaking rapid Spanish and making cutting motions at his legs. I found Pablo in room 247, my parents flanking his bed like gargoyles protecting their broken treasure. His legs were wrapped in blood-stained bandages. External fixators, these metal cages, surrounded both legs with pins going straight through the skin into bone. The contraptions looked like torture devices, which I suppose they were. He looked smaller somehow, despite the hardware meant to make him taller. The smell in the room was sweet and rotten, infection mixed with industrial antiseptic. My mother saw me first. Her face lit up like I was there to join their crusade. "You came. I knew you'd understand eventually. Family supports. Family." Dad just nodded, as if my arrival validated stated something he'd believed all along. I approached the bed slowly. Pablo's eyes were closed, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping. The heart monitor gave him away, speeding up as I got closer. His face was waxy, sweat beading on his enlarged forehead despite the air conditioning. The doctor came in, this young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. His coat was stained, his English heavily accented as he explained that the infection had spread to the bone. Osteomyelitis, he called it. They'd managed to stop it, but Pablo would need months of antibiotics. The lengthening process had to be halted. Any further manipulation could spread the infection to his bloodstream. My father immediately started arguing. He demanded they continue the procedure, waving a contract in the doctor's face. My mother backed him up, insisting they'd paid for 3 inches and expected 3 inches. "We didn't come all this way for nothing," she shrieked. The doctor just shook his head and left, muttering something in Spanish that didn't sound complimentary. That's when Pablo finally opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, pupils dilated from whatever painkillers they had him on. He tried to speak, but only managed a croak, his lips cracked and bleeding. I got him water, helped him sip it slowly. My parents watched like hawks, probably worried I'd poison him with shortness or something equally ridiculous. The water dribbled down his chin, and I wiped it away, feeling how hot his skin was. Fever. The infection wasn't as controlled as the doctor claimed. Pablo grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak but desperate, his swollen fingers barely able to close around my arm. He pulled me close and whispered something I couldn't make out. I leaned in further, close enough to smell the sickness on his breath. "Get me out," he rasped. "Please, get me out of here." I pulled back, confused. My parents immediately swooped in, asking what he'd said. I lied, told them he wanted more water. But as I looked into my brother's eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, bone-deep terror. The golden child, the height warrior, the one who'd chosen excellence. He was finally afraid of what he'd become. I stayed in Mexico for 3 days. 3 days of watching my brother fight infection while my parents fought reality. They'd rented an apartment near the hospital, this dingy place with bars on the windows and a kitchen that smelled like gas. Every morning they'd drag me there to plan Pablo's recovery strategy over instant coffee and stale pastries. The planning sessions were insane. Mom had brought binders full of research on bone healing, growth factors, and alternative therapies she'd found online. Dad sketched diagrams of pulley systems we could install at home to keep stretching Pablo's legs during recovery. They talked about him like he was a project, not their son dying of infection in a foreign hospital. I spent most of my time at Pablo's bedside while they schemed. The other patients in the ward were all there for the same reason. Medical tourism gone wrong. The guy in the next bed had gotten dental implants that rejected. Across from us, a woman's botched nose job had collapsed. We were all Americans who'd chased cheaper procedures south of the border and paid for it in flesh. Pablo drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was lucid, he'd beg me to call the American embassy to get him transferred to a real hospital. When the fever spiked, he'd ramble about being tall enough to ride roller coasters, to reach the top shelf, to look Dad in the eye. The antibiotics weren't working fast enough. I could see it in how the nurses whispered, how they changed his bandages more frequently, how the smell got worse despite their efforts. On the 3rd night, I made a decision. I waited until my parents went back to their apartment, then found Pablo's doctor smoking outside the emergency entrance. I offered him $5,000 cash, my entire emergency fund, to transfer Pablo to an American hospital in San Diego. He took it without hesitation, probably happy to get rid of a problem patient. The transfer happened at dawn. I rode with Pablo in the ambulance, holding his hand as we crossed the border. He was delirious by then, mumbling about growth charts and love points. My parents didn't know until we were already across. The voicemails started immediately. Threats, accusations, promises to have me arrested for kidnapping. I turned off my phone and focused on my brother. The American hospital was like stepping into a different world. Clean, efficient, doctors who spoke clear English and looked horrified at Pablo's condition. They rushed him into surgery to clean out the infection, remove the infected bone segments, stabilize what was left. I sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, drinking terrible coffee and wondering if I'd saved my brother or stolen him. When Pablo woke up after surgery, he was different. The fever was gone, but so was something else. He stared at his legs, shortened now from the removed bone, and didn't say anything for a long time. The surgeon explained he'd be about 2 inches shorter than before the procedure. Pablo just nodded, no emotion on his face. My parents arrived that evening like a hurricane. Security had to escort them out twice when they tried to physically remove Pablo from his bed. They accused me of sabotage, of jealousy, of destroying Pablo's future. Mom actually spit at me. Dad tried to punch me but missed, his rage making him clumsy. They were banned from the hospital after that, which only made things worse. Pablo needed months of recovery. The hospital bills were astronomical. Insurance wouldn't cover elective surgery complications, especially not ones that happened in Mexico. I emptied my savings, maxed out credit cards, even sold my car. Sam helped without me asking, transferring money despite my protests. My parents, who'd spent hundreds of thousands on height enhancement over the years, contributed nothing. They said Pablo was dead to them now that he'd chosen mediocrity. I moved Pablo into my apartment in Oregon. Sam and I converted the living room into a recovery space, complete with hospital bed and physical therapy equipment, not for stretching, for never learning to walk again. The infection and surgeries had damaged nerves, weakened muscles. Some days Pablo couldn't even stand without help. The physical therapy was brutal. Pablo had to relearn basic movements, rebuild strength in legs that had been broken and infected and pieced back together. But worse was the mental adjustment. He'd spent his entire life defining himself by height, by growth, by the pursuit of vertical excellence. Now he was shorter than before, permanently damaged from chasing inches. Depression hit hard. Pablo would stare at old photos of himself, measuring the difference with his eyes. He kept the ankle weights by his bed like relics of a lost religion. Some nights I'd hear him crying, these deep, gulping sobs that shook his whole body. He'd lost more than height. He'd lost his entire identity. Our parents kept calling, leaving increasingly unhinged messages. They'd disowned us both now, written us out of wills, told the extended family we were dead. They started a blog about parenting failures, where they documented everything they'd done right and how we'd thrown it away. The comments section was full of other height-obsessed parents sharing similar stories of ungrateful children. 3 months into recovery, something shifted. Pablo started talking during physical therapy instead of just grunting through exercises. He asked about my life, about Sam, about rock climbing. He watched me train on the climbing wall I'd installed in our garage, seeing for the first time how my body wasn't a failure, but perfectly designed for something our parents never imagined. He started going to therapy, real therapy, not the height maximization counseling our parents had forced on us. The therapist specialized in body dysmorphia and cult deprogramming, which turned out to be exactly what Pablo needed. He'd bring home worksheets about self-worth, about identity beyond physical attributes, about breaking free from toxic family systems. Sam became his biggest cheerleader. She'd take him to her basketball games, introducing him to teammates who saw height as just one tool among many. She taught him to cook, to garden, to find joy in things that had nothing to do with measurement. Watching them bond over sourdough starters and herb gardens was surreal after years of seeing Pablo only care about inches. The turning point came 6 months after the surgery. Pablo could walk without assistance now, though with a slight limp that would probably be permanent. We were at the grocery store when we ran into Marcus, a guy from our high school. Marcus had been shorter than both of us, but was now a successful chef with his own restaurant. He invited us to dinner, excited to catch up. That meal changed everything for Pablo. Marcus talked about how being short had helped in kitchens, less bending, better angles for prep work, easier to navigate tight spaces. He'd built an empire not despite his height, but by finding places where it didn't matter or even helped. Pablo listened like he was hearing a foreign language for the first time. Pablo started volunteering at Marcus's restaurant, just washing dishes at first, but he threw himself into it with the same obsession he'd once reserved for growth hormones. He learned knife skills, flavor profiles, plating techniques. His enlarged hands, a side effect of the HGH abuse, turned out to be perfect for kneading dough. His attention to detail, honed by years of measuring himself, translated into precise cooking. Our parents found out, of course. They always did. The emails started again, now focused on how Pablo was wasting his potential in a servant profession. They'd found studies linking height to chef salaries, statistics about the average height of Food Network stars. Mom sent Pablo growth hormone prescriptions, claiming they'd help with his recovery. Dad mailed elevator shoes to our apartment. We threw them all away, unopened. A year after the surgery, Pablo enrolled in culinary school. He was still processing the trauma, still working through years of programming, but he was building something new. He'd gained weight, healthy weight, not the gaunt look from his hormone days. His face had normalized somewhat, though the bone changes were permanent. He looked like himself for the first time since childhood. That's when our parents escalated. They couldn't handle losing both sons to mediocrity, so they decided to take action. It started small, showing up at Pablo's school, trying to convince administrators that he was mentally unfit, leaving pamphlets about growth clinics under our apartment door, calling Sam's work to tell them she was in an abusive relationship with height-deficient men. We got security cameras after they broke into our apartment while we were out. They'd replaced all our furniture with taller versions, bar-height tables, raised bed frames, even elevated toilet seats. They'd left a note, "We're saving you from yourselves." The violation felt worse than the lockout in high school. This was our space, our sanctuary, and they'd contaminated it with their obsession. The restraining order was Sam's idea. I'd been reluctant, still hoping somehow they'd snap out of it. But when they started showing up at Pablo's restaurant shifts, measuring him in front of customers, screaming about genetic disappointments during the dinner rush, we had no choice. The court process was humiliating, explaining to a judge that our parents were height supremacists who'd rather see us dead than average. They contested it naturally, showed up to court with their own lawyer and a briefcase full of evidence that we needed their intervention. Growth charts, medical studies, testimonials from other parents who'd successfully made their children taller. The judge looked increasingly disturbed as they presented their case, especially when Mom broke down crying about her stolen tall sons. The restraining order was granted, 200 feet, no contact except through lawyers. You'd think that would end it, but obsession doesn't respect legal boundaries. They started a support group for parents of height-deficient children, holding meetings at the community center. They'd stand exactly 200 feet from our apartment with signs. "It's not too late. Choose growth. We still love you, but taller. Pablo handled it better than I expected. Maybe the therapy was working, or maybe nearly dying had given him perspective. He'd wave at them from the window sometimes, not cruelly, just acknowledging their presence. "They're sick," he'd say, like I was sick, like I still am sometimes. He kept a photo of himself from peak hormone abuse as a reminder. The swollen features, the desperate eyes, the body destroying itself for inches. The real test came when Pablo won a cooking competition. Local thing, nothing huge, but he'd created this incredible dish inspired by our grandmother's recipes. The prize included a newspaper feature, complete with photos. He knew our parents would see it, would measure his height against every object in the frame, would calculate exactly how much potential he'd wasted. He did it anyway. The article ran with a full-page photo of Pablo in his chef's whites, standing proud in a kitchen where height meant nothing. The headline read, "Rising Star Chef Finds His Calling." Our parents' response was predictable. Anonymous letters to the editor about the paper promoting unhealthy body standards, claims that Pablo's recipes were nutritionally designed to stunt growth. But something beautiful happened. Other people started reaching out. Kids whose parents had put them through similar height obsessions. Adults still dealing with the trauma of being measured, stretched, supplemented against their will. Pablo started a support group that met in the restaurant after hours. They'd cook together, share stories, rebuild their relationships with their bodies. I watched my brother transform from victim to healer. He developed recipes specifically for people recovering from growth hormone abuse, working with nutritionists to address the damage. He hired other height disappointments at his restaurant, creating a kitchen where everyone fit perfectly, regardless of size. His limp became part of his story, not something to hide, but evidence of survival. Sam and I got engaged that winter. We kept it quiet, just close friends at a small ceremony. Pablo was my best man, standing beside me without a single mention of height differences. He'd made our wedding cake, 3 tiers of perfection that had nothing to do with being tall and everything to do with being skilled. Our parents found out through social media. Someone had tagged us in photos, and within hours they were blowing up our phones from new numbers. The messages were exactly what you'd expect. Sam was trapping me. This was my last chance to find a proper woman. Statistics about children of height mismatched parents. They'd created fake profiles to comment on our wedding photos, pointing out height differences in every shot. That's when Pablo surprised me. He'd been saving money, planning something without telling anyone. He bought the house next door to our parents, not to reconcile, but to reclaim the space. He turned it into a restaurant, the Short Stack, specializing in breakfast foods with cheeky names like Bite-Sized Bliss and Compact Comfort. The grand opening was everything. Our parents stood on their property line, exactly 200 feet away, holding signs and chanting about growth potential. Pablo had anticipated this. He'd hired a mariachi band to play at exactly the volume needed to drown them out. Customers thought it was dinner theater, some kind of performance art. They took selfies with our protesting parents in the background. The restaurant was a hit. Food critics praised Pablo's innovative approach, his story of overcoming adversity. He did interviews about recovering from surgery, from addiction to growth, from a lifetime of being told he wasn't enough. Our parents responded by trying to buy the building, then trying to get it condemned, then standing outside with pictures of Pablo at his proper height. But Pablo had found something they never understood: peace with himself. He'd cook their favorite meals and leave them at the property line, still warm, with notes saying he loved them. They'd throw the food away uneaten, but he kept cooking, kept leaving offerings at the boundary of the restraining order. It wasn't about changing them anymore. It was about choosing love over height, nourishment over measurement. The breakthrough came 2 years later. Dad had a heart attack. All those years of stress about inches finally catching up. Pablo heard the ambulance, saw them wheeling Dad out. Despite everything, he closed the restaurant and rushed to the hospital. I met him there, both of us navigating the complex emotions of loving parents who'd hurt us so deeply. Mom looked older, smaller somehow. She sat in the waiting room clutching Dad's measurement ruler, the one from our childhood. Her first words to us weren't about height. She just said, "He might die." The ruler clattered to the floor and she didn't pick it up. We sat with her through the surgery, the recovery, the rehabilitation. Dad had to relearn to walk, just like Pablo had. He needed assistance, support, patience, all things that had nothing to do with being tall. Pablo brought food to the hospital every day, meals designed for healing. Dad ate them without asking about growth-promoting ingredients. The change wasn't instant or complete. They still believed what they believed, still saw height as paramount. But watching Dad struggle to stand, needing Pablo's shortened, scarred legs to support him, something shifted. They stopped mentioning growth hormones. The signs disappeared from their yard. Mom donated the stretching equipment to a circus school that actually needed it. They never apologized, not really. But they started eating at Pablo's restaurant, sitting in a corner booth where they could see him in his element. They'd measure him with their eyes. Old habits die hard. But they'd also clean their plates, leave reasonable tips, sometimes even compliment the food. Pablo hired Dad as a bookkeeper when he was recovered enough to work. It was awkward at first. Dad sitting in the back office of the restaurant he'd tried to shut down, but numbers were neutral. Didn't care about height. Dad was good with finances when they weren't being spent on growth schemes. He'd found a way to be useful that didn't involve rulers or charts. Mom started volunteering at the support group, mostly making coffee and cleaning up. She'd listen to the stories of other height-obsessed families with this haunted look, recognizing herself in the worst parts. Sometimes she'd speak up, warning parents about the path she'd taken. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was progress. The real victory came when Pablo catered a medical conference on treating growth hormone abuse. He stood in front of doctors who'd seen the damage firsthand, sharing his story while serving food that celebrated flavor over size. Our parents were there, sitting in the back, watching their son be recognized as an expert in survival rather than a failure of growth. After the conference, a young doctor approached Pablo. He ran a clinic for kids whose parents were pushing extreme height treatments. Would Pablo consider speaking to them, showing them another way? Pablo said yes immediately, then looked at our parents. Would you come too? Show them where it leads? That became their new routine. Pablo would tell his story of survival and recovery. Our parents would tell theirs of regret and slow recognition. They never fully renounced their beliefs. I don't think they could, but they could show the cost. Mom would bring the old growth charts, the photos of Pablo dying in Mexico, the hospital bills that meant nothing compared to almost losing her son. The program helped dozens of families step back from the brink. Kids who were heading down Pablo's path saw where it led. Parents who thought they were helping saw the damage they were causing. Not all of them changed course, but enough did that it mattered. Pablo's restaurant expanded into a small chain, each location managed by someone who'd overcome body-related trauma. The original location, next to our parents' house, remained the flagship. Dad still did the books. Mom still volunteered at support meetings. They still measured us sometimes, couldn't help themselves. But now it was followed by, how's the new menu coming? Or, Sam looked happy at dinner. Sam and I had a daughter. The first time my parents saw her, I watched Mom's hands twitch toward a measuring tape before catching herself. She's perfect, Mom said instead, and almost sounded like she meant it. Pablo made her first birthday cake, a single tear because sometimes one is enough. Our daughter grew up surrounded by people who'd learned the hard way that worth isn't measured in inches. Pablo taught her to cook, to find joy in creation rather than comparison. Our parents, reformed but not cured, loved her carefully. They bought her books instead of growth supplements, enrolled her in art classes instead of stretching sessions. The height charts came down eventually, replaced with photos of family dinners at Pablo's restaurant. The measurement wall was painted over, though you could still see the marks if you knew where to look. Some damage can't be erased, only built over, layered with better memories, until the pain becomes part of the foundation rather than the whole structure. Pablo never grew those 3 inches he'd paid for in bone and blood. He walked with a limp that got worse in cold weather. His body bore the scars of our parents' obsession and his own desperate compliance. But he stood taller than any of us, having climbed out of a hole measured in more than feet and inches. Our family dinners were quiet now, focused on food rather than height. We'd sit around the table, me, Sam, our daughter, Pablo, our parents, and just exist together. No measurements, no comparisons, no talk of potential wasted or achieved. Just people who'd hurt each other terribly and chosen to heal together, imperfectly but genuinely. The healing wasn't complete, might never be. Dad still read articles about height and success. Mom still noticed when Pablo wore shoes with thicker soles. They'd probably die believing their children could have been more if we'd just grown a few more inches. But they'd learned to love us anyway, at whatever height we stood. Pablo's support group had a saying, you can't grow taller, but you can grow stronger. It was cheesy, the kind of thing that looked good on motivational posters. But for those of us who'd been broken and stretched and measured into madness, it meant everything. We couldn't change our height, but we could change our perspective. We couldn't add inches, but we could add joy. The last time I saw the old measurement ruler, it was in a box in my parents' garage. Dad was using it to prop up a wobbly table, its sacred markings now just wood-keeping furniture stable. I thought about stealing it, burning it, making some symbolic gesture of triumph. Instead, I left it there, doing its new job, no longer measuring worth, but simply filling space. That's the thing about recovery. It's not about dramatic gestures or perfect endings. It's about small choices, daily decisions to see yourself as more than a number on a wall. It's about learning to cook instead of stretch, to love instead of measure, to exist in a body that might not meet specifications, but carries you through life anyway. Pablo still gets emails from people finding their way out of height obsession. He answers everyone, sharing recipes and resources, and the hard-won knowledge that you can survive being seen as not enough. Our parents sometimes help him respond, their shame transformed into something useful, their expertise in causing damage now applied to preventing it. We're not a success story, exactly. We're a survival story. A family that broke itself apart over inches and slowly, painfully, imperfectly stitched itself back together. We're shorter than our parents wanted, taller than we needed to be, exactly the height we are, and most days, that's enough. The growth charts are gone, but the scars remain. Pablo's limp, my wariness, our parents' regret, but scars are proof of healing, evidence that what was broken can mend. We're not the family we were supposed to be, the tall, successful, genetically optimized unit our parents envisioned. We're the family we chose to become, damaged, recovering, measuring love in recipes shared and stories told rather than inches gained. Some nights, I still dream about the measurement wall, about losing privileges for missing arbitrary marks. But I wake up next to Sam, check on our daughter sleeping soundly, text Pablo about weekend plans. The life I built at the wrong height turned out to be exactly the right size. Our parents never became different people. They just learned to live with who we were instead of who they'd tried to force us to become. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, or forgetting. It was moving forward anyway, choosing connection over perfection, accepting that some obsessions run too deep to fully extract. But we survived it. The hormones, the surgeries, the lockouts, and interventions. We survived our parents' love, twisted into something sharp by their obsession with height. And in surviving, we found something they'd never thought to measure. The distance between who they wanted us to be and who we actually were, and the grace to bridge it anyway. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Things were too quiet, too normal. My parents attending support groups and helping other families seemed like progress, but I knew them too well. 20+ years of height obsession doesn't just evaporate. The first sign came when Pablo noticed inventory discrepancies at the restaurant. Small things, protein powder missing, supplements he used for special dietary meals. Dad was still doing the books, said it was probably just miscounting. Pablo wanted to believe him, installed new locks just in case. Then came the water bottles. Pablo found them in Dad's desk drawer during a routine filing. Clear liquid, unmarked, hidden behind tax documents. He brought them to me, hands shaking. We both knew without testing what they were. Growth hormone, diluted and ready to add to drinks. I confronted Dad that night, found him in the garage, organizing his old height optimization equipment. He claimed he was donating. He didn't deny it when I showed him the bottles. Just stood there, shoulders sagging, looking older than his 63 years. He'd been microdosing the restaurant staff. Nothing dangerous, he insisted, just small amounts in the employee water cooler. He showed me his notebook, detailed records of each employee's height, weekly measurements he'd taken secretly, calculations of optimal hormone levels. The obsession had never left, just gone underground. Mom knew. Of course she knew. She'd been helping, distracting staff while Dad measured door frames they'd walk through, calculating heights based on head clearance. They'd created a whole system, convinced they were helping these kids reach their potential. The support group testimony, the apparent change of heart, it was real, but incomplete. They couldn't stop trying to fix everyone's height. Pablo took it harder than me. He'd trusted them, given them purpose, believed in their redemption. Finding out they'd been drugging his employees broke something in him. He fired Dad immediately, changed every lock, tested all the food supplies. The violation was worse than Mexico, worse than the forced injections. This was slow, secretive, planned. The employees were furious when we told them. One kid, Arthur, had been experiencing weird symptoms, jaw pain, joint aches, excessive sweating. Classic early signs of HGH side effects. He wanted to press charges. Others just wanted Dad gone. Pablo paid for everyone to get tested, covered medical bills for anyone showing symptoms. We thought about involving police, but what would we say? Our dad put growth hormones in the water because he thinks everyone should be taller? It sounded insane. Instead, Pablo banned them from all his properties, hired security to enforce it. The restraining order got updated to include no contact with restaurant staff. That's when things escalated. Our parents couldn't accept being cut off again, not after they'd gotten so close. They started their own restaurant directly across from Pablo's flagship location. Heightened expectations, a growth-themed cafe serving hormone-infused smoothies and stretching equipment at every table. It was perfectly legal. They disclosed everything, marketed it as optimization dining. Their menu had height-based pricing. Tall customers got discounts, short ones paid premium. They installed measuring stations at the entrance, rang a bell whenever someone came in over 6 feet. It was grotesque, but effective. People came for the novelty, stayed for the promise of growth. Pablo tried to ignore it, but they made it impossible. They'd stand outside during his peak hours with megaphones, advertising their superior growth solutions. They hired actors to wear stilts and hand out flyers about the dangers of accepting mediocrity. They even sponsored a youth basketball team, requiring players to eat at their restaurant and follow their height regimens. The competition got vicious. They'd send fake health inspectors to Pablo's place, spread rumors about growth-stunting ingredients in his food. They created social media accounts claiming Pablo was intentionally keeping people short out of jealousy. Mom started a podcast called Reaching Higher, where she interviewed parents of tall children, always mentioning how her own sons had chosen limitation. Sam had enough first. She was 6 months pregnant with our second child, and the stress was affecting her health. She confronted my parents at their restaurant, walked right in during lunch rush. I wasn't there, but heard about it from customers who filmed it. She didn't yell or make threats. She just stood there, pregnant, belly prominent, and told them they were about to have another grandchild they'd never meet if they kept this up, that their obsession had cost them one family and was about to cost them another, that their grandchildren would grow up not knowing them because they couldn't stop measuring love in inches. Mom tried to offer her a height prediction ultrasound. Dad pulled out growth charts for optimizing prenatal development. Sam just turned and left, but not before taking their promotional materials and dumping them in the trash. The video went viral locally. Pregnant woman stands up to height-obsessed in-laws. The publicity hurt their business. People started seeing through the gimmick to the darkness underneath. Reviews mentioned feeling uncomfortable unpredictable with the mandatory measuring, the constant height commentary, the subtle shaming of shorter customers. Health bloggers picked up the story, warning about unlicensed hormone distribution. They blamed Pablo for the backlash, accused him of orchestrating a smear campaign, turning Sam against them, poisoning the community's mind. The truth was simpler. People recognized obsession when they saw it, felt the discomfort of being reduced to measurements. Their restaurants started failing. Turns out most people don't want to be measured while they eat, don't want their worth tied to their height. The novelty wore off fast. Within 6 months, they were hemorrhaging money. The youth basketball team quit when parents realized the mandatory growth regimens were borderline abusive. That's when they got desperate. Pablo came to work one morning to find his restaurant vandalized. Every door frame had been marked with height measurements, red paint showing optimal levels. Windows were covered with growth charts. The sign had been modified to read, "The short stack, stunting growth since 2019. Security footage showed our parents, dressed in black, spending hours measuring and marking. They'd been meticulous, even measuring the bathroom stalls and marking them as inadequate for proper human development. It was sad more than scary. 2 elderly people crawling around with rulers and paint, unable to let go. Pablo didn't press charges. He could have, should have maybe, but he just had everything cleaned and moved on. He was tired of fighting them, tired of being angry. He had a business to run, a life to live that didn't revolve around their approval or their inches. Their restaurant closed 2 weeks later. The final insult was the going out of business sale. Everything must grow. 75% off height consultations. Nobody came. They sat in their empty dining room, surrounded by growth charts and measuring equipment, waiting for customers who'd found better places to eat. The foreclosure hit them hard. They'd invested everything in the restaurant, convinced it would show the world they were right about height. Losing it meant more than losing money. It meant losing their platform, their purpose, their way to keep pushing their obsession on others. They moved into a small apartment, downsizing from the house where they'd measured us all those years. I helped them pack, finding boxes of our childhood height records, photos of Pablo in his hormone phase, receipts for thousands of dollars of growth treatments. Mom wanted to keep it all. Dad just looked defeated. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They'd spent decades trying to get higher and ended up there anyway, just not how they'd imagined. The stairs were hard on Dad's heart, Mom's knees. Height didn't help with aging, turned out. Pablo hired them back. Not at the restaurant. That bridge was burned, but he'd started a meal delivery service for seniors and needed help with logistics. It was remote work, no access to food or employees, just spreadsheets and scheduling. They took it gratefully, finally humbled by their failures. Our second daughter was born that winter. We didn't tell my parents for 2 weeks, needing time to bond without their measurements and predictions. When we finally introduced them, Mom's hands stayed in her pockets. No tape measures, no charts, just tears and careful congratulations. They started therapy, real therapy, not height counseling. The therapist specialized in obsessive behaviors, helping them understand why they'd fixated on height as the measure of worth. It was slow work, unpacking decades of belief, but they showed up every week. The breakthrough came when they met another couple in therapy whose obsession had been their children's weight. Different measurement, same damage. Hearing their story, the forced diets, the public weigh-ins, the daughter who'd developed severe eating disorders, hit my parents hard. They saw themselves reflected in another family's destruction. They wrote Pablo a letter, not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement. They listed every harm they'd caused, every line they'd crossed, every time they'd chosen inches over love. They didn't ask for forgiveness, just wanted him to know they finally understood the damage. Pablo framed it, hung it in his office next to his awards and favorable reviews. A reminder that recognition comes in many forms, not all of them pleasant, but all of them real. He'd send them photos sometimes, him cooking, serving customers, living his life at his own height. The holidays were quiet now. We'd meet at neutral locations, parks, restaurants, anywhere but the old house with its measurement walls. Conversation stayed surface level, weather, sports, anything but height. It was stilted but peaceful, the careful dance of people who'd hurt each other learning to coexist. My daughters grew without daily measurements. They knew Grandma and Grandpa had problems with height, the way other kids knew about grandparents with drinking problems or gambling addictions. It was discussed honestly, but age-appropriately. They understood some sicknesses were about measuring the wrong things. Pablo never fully forgave them. He'd found peace, built his life, succeeded despite them. But forgiveness was a step too far. He could be in the same room, share meals, even laugh at their jokes, but the trust was gone. They'd broken it too many times, in too many ways, but he fed them. Every week, a delivery of prepared meals showed up at their apartment. Soups for Dad's heart, anti-inflammatory dishes for Mom's arthritis, food as medicine, but not the kind they'd forced on us. This was care without agenda, nourishment without measurement. They aged rapidly after the restaurant failure. The stress of maintaining their obsession for so long had taken its toll. Dad had another heart episode, minor but scary. Mom developed tremors that made holding measuring tools impossible. Their bodies betrayed their beliefs, shrinking them in ways that had nothing to do with height. I visited more as they declined, found myself helping Dad with his pills, driving Mom to appointments. They'd shrunk, both of them. them, age stealing the inches they'd worshipped. Dad joked darkly that he was finally experiencing what we had, getting shorter every year, losing ground to time. The end came quietly. Dad passed first, heart giving out during an afternoon nap. Mom found him slumped in his chair, growth hormone study still open on his laptop. Even at the end, he couldn't let go completely. The obsession had become like breathing, automatic, unconscious, impossible to stop. Mom lasted 6 more months. Without Dad, she seemed to deflate. She gave me their last box of height documentation before she died, asked me to do whatever I thought best. Inside were our baby shoes, marked with projected heights, our hair samples, saved to test for growth potential. Decades of delusion disguised as love. Pablo and I burned it all, built a fire in his restaurant's outdoor oven, and fed it every chart, every measurement, every record of their obsession. The smoke was probably toxic, all those laminated papers and chemical-treated growth schedules. We stood there breathing it in anyway, watching our measured childhoods turn to ash. The funeral was small. Us, our families, a few people from their therapy group. Pablo catered it, simple food without agenda. Nobody mentioned height in the eulogies. We talked about other things, Mom's garden, Dad's skill with numbers, the way they'd loved us wrong but completely. Their apartment was mostly empty when we cleaned it out. They'd sold everything valuable for the restaurant venture, but in the closet, we found one last ruler, the original, from our childhood kitchen, worn smooth from daily use, marked with our initials at various ages. Pablo held it for a long time, then snapped it in half. We kept nothing, donated their clothes, sold the furniture, threw away the last remnants of their height obsession. Their legacy wasn't in objects, but in scars. Pablo's limp, my wariness, the distance between what they'd wanted and what we'd become. The restaurant thrived. Pablo expanded again, hired more people who'd never fit their parents' measurements. He spoke at medical conferences about recovery, at schools about body acceptance. Our parents' cautionary tale became part of his presentation, the extreme end of what happens when love gets twisted into obsession. My daughters grew up strong and unmeasured. They climbed trees without worrying about compressed spines, played sports that suited them regardless of height advantages. They knew their worth had nothing to do with inches, everything to do with character. Sometimes I dream about them still. Not nightmares anymore, just memories. The morning measurements, the protein shakes, the constant calculation of our worth in vertical distance. But I wake up in my own home, built to fit my family perfectly. No modifications needed. Pablo walks with a cane now on bad days. The surgery damage gets worse with age, but he doesn't hide it. He tells customers who ask about his limp the whole story. Mexico, infection, parents who loved height more than health. They usually order extra dessert after hearing it, moved by survival served alongside good food. We scattered their ashes at sea. No marker, no monument, no measurement of where they lay. Just water and wind and the endless horizon where height means nothing. Pablo said a few words about forgiveness being a process, not a destination. I said nothing, just watched their remains disappear into something too vast to measure. The old house sold to a family with young kids. I drove by once, saw they'd painted over the measurement wall completely. New growth charts hung in the kitchen, but these had stickers and smiley faces, celebrations instead of failures. Different family, different obsessions probably, but hopefully gentler ones. Pablo named a dish after them eventually. The humble pie, a dessert that looked taller than it was, an optical illusion of height that collapsed into something sweet when you cut into it. He donated the proceeds to programs helping kids escape abusive family expectations. Mom and Dad would have hated the symbolism. That felt right somehow. We survived them. That's the bottom line. Survived their love, their obsession, their inability to see us as enough. We built lives they couldn't measure, found success in places they'd never think to look. We grew in every direction but up, and it turned out that was exactly the right way to go. The scars remain. Pablo's physical ones, my emotional ones, the family tree pruned by their obsession. But scars are proof of healing, evidence that what they broke didn't stay broken. We're shorter than they wanted, taller than we needed to be, exactly who we are. Their legacy isn't height. It's the knowledge that love can be twisted into something harmful, that good intentions can cause real damage, that sometimes the best thing parents can leave their children is a clear example of what not to become. We learned from their mistakes, built better lives on the foundation of their failures. In the end, we measured up, just not the way they'd planned.